Good evening, everyone. Bonsoir. Oh, you're so good. Wow, great. I am Maryse Laflamme, Director General of the Outreach and Engagement Branch at Library and Archives Canada. I would like to begin, you hear me okay, right? Okay. I would like to begin by respectfully acknowledging that we are gathered on the ancestral lands and waters of the Anishinaabe Algonquin people. Since time immemorial, they have inhabited and cared for these lands on which we live, work, and play. Nous honorons le lien sacré, les unissant depuis si longtemps à ce territoire qui demeure non cédé. À Bibliothèque et Archives Canada, nous reconnaissons que sans vérité, il ne peut y avoir de réconciliation. That is why we are committed to amplifying the voices and sharing the stories of those who have been silenced throughout history. This evening, we are proud to partner with the Ottawa International Writers Festival and Ottawa Public Library to celebrate the latest work from one of the most compelling voices in our culture, while also coming together to commemorate the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. Cette journée importante rend hommage à tous les membres des peuples autochtones qui ne sont jamais rentrés à la maison après avoir fréquenté des pensionnats, ainsi qu'aux survivants et à leurs familles et à leur communauté. As we take this time together to honor their memory, we are grateful to welcome you here to learn more about The Knowing, the newest book by critically acclaimed and award-winning author Tanya Talaga. À Bibliothèque Archives Canada, nous menons de nombreux projets dont l'objectif est de préserver et faire connaître davantage de voix et d'histoires qui documentent le passé et la réalité des peuples autochtones. One example is our Project Naming Initiative, which seeks to identify the people, places, and activities depicted in photographs of First Nation, Inuit, and Métis Nation communities preserved in our collection. We are fortunate to have colleagues from this project with us here tonight that you could see later at one of our tables. Enfin, au nom de toute l'équipe de Bibliothèque et Archives Canada présente ce soir, je tiens à dire que nous avons très hâte d'assister à la conversation éclairante qui aura lieu avec Madame Talaga. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to hand over to Sarah McIntyre, Division Manager of Ottawa Public Library. Merci à tous et à toutes. Enjoy this special event.
Merci, Maryse. Bonsoir, tout le monde. Thank you so much for joining us this evening as we mark the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. You may notice we have a photographer here tonight, right here in the front. Thank you. If taking photos for use in reports and in promotions, if you don't want to feature in any of the photos, can you please just mention it directly to the photographer before the end of the night? So tonight, we are honored to have Tanya Talaga, acclaimed author whose writing, research, and reporting has made unforgettable impacts on our understanding of Indigenous experiences in Canada. Her debut book, Seven Fallen Feathers, won numerous awards and became a touchstone for conversations around Indigenous justice, truth, and reconciliation. Today, we honor the release of her latest work, The Knowing. Deeply personal and meticulously researched, The Knowing delves into the centuries-long oppression of Indigenous peoples, tracing how this history still echoes through Indigenous communities today. Hosting tonight's conversation is Joy Spear-Chief Morris, a talented and accomplished writer and advocate herself. Joy brings a wealth of knowledge and insight into the intersection of Indigenous history, identity, and contemporary issues, and making her the perfect host for tonight's evening. Before we begin, I do want to mention that throughout October, Ottawa Public Library is participating in the Together We Read Ontario program. And the selected title for this unlimited access ebook program is Tanya's book, All Our Relations, Finding the Path Forward, an important and moving examination of the youth suicide crisis facing Indigenous communities in Canada and abroad. The book is a powerful call for action and justice for Indigenous peoples. From October 1st through 29th, you can borrow All Our Relations in ebook or e-audio format with no wait list, and there's an unlimited number of people who can read this book at the same time, so it's a great opportunity. So back to the evening with our guest and our host. Thank you so much for joining us, and it's going to be a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so oki ni danko sabaki nyoptadit sudokidoki. So just introducing myself in Blackfoot, my name is Joy. I'm a member of the Kainai Blood Tribe in southern Alberta, and acknowledging that, as we've already said, we're here on unceded Algonquin territory. And also acknowledging today is Truth and Reconciliation, for Truth and Reconciliation, National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. So I know for like me as an intergenerational survivor and the first person in my family not to go to residential schools, it's a heavy day, and so I think there's nothing more poignant than having this conversation, and thank you for joining me.
Wachea, Bushu, Tanya Talaga, Nagisnikas, Kamusko, Pimushishe, Pinishish, Nagisnikas. I am also delighted to be here on unceded Algonquin territory, and I was very glad to see you today and to see many survivors at the Parliament Hill Day of Reflection. And I just want to say a special Chimigwich and hello to all survivors that are here. We value you, and it's good that you're with us today. And I also want to say a special hello to Anishinaabe Aski Nation Deputy Grand Chief Anna Betty Ashley Penenscom, who is also here today with us, and that means the world to me to see folks from Treaty 9 here. Yeah.
So we're here to talk about your new book, which is The Knowing, which is phenomenal, and then the documentary as well that came out last week on CBC Gem, which is also just, it's an incredible 4 chapters to go through. If you haven't seen the documentary yet, I highly recommend, and it follows the book in the same way, but also in a different way of storytelling, which I think is really interesting for people who've read the book and seen the documentary. But to start with, I know that with the book, you've divided it into 4 chapters that are based on the medicine wheel and the 4 colors. And I was wondering if you could maybe talk about why it is you chose to divide the book in that way.
You know, I wasn't sure if I should or not, but it came to me in a dream, actually, that, you know, because I think about things a lot before I start to write. It's always sort of in my mind for a long time. It's like it percolates there. And I remember going to ceremony, actually, with Anna Betty's brother, who I often go to ceremony with, and we had a discussion about it. You know, after the sweat lodge, there were about 5 elders around, and we talked about it. Because I asked, "Is this appropriate?" You know, I think this is how I should be doing it, and I wasn't sure if I should or not. And everyone there around the fire said, yes, you do it. And there is a really insightful, one of the names of the chapters comes from Elder Sam, and he told me, because I speak to him like every day on Facebook Messenger. You know, sometimes it's about heavy, important things. Sometimes it's like he sends me gifts of cats going like this on typewriters. And we were talking about Annie Carpenter and The Knowing, and he said to me, "The end is the beginning." And that was in my head. The medicine wheel was in my head, and this circular structure of the book, that's how it came about, because we are connected, right? As Anishinaabe people, we're all part of a continuum of life. And the medicine wheel has 4 parts, and so the book has 4 equal chapters that coincide with the turn.
And, you know, even going from the end is the beginning, the book starts with, you know, the finding of the 215 graves in Kamloops, which for a lot of Canadians, that was kind of a moment of awareness of something that, as Indigenous people and our families as survivors and intergenerational survivors, we we always knew. And it was something that everyone knew that no one had really kind of vocalized in some ways, or some had been very loud about it and were just never heard. And for you, when you talk about that in the book, you talk about getting on a plane, going right there, being with the community right from the beginning. And you also talk about this moment where you had in your head, find Annie, find Annie, find Annie.
Yeah.
And why do you think it was that moment that just solidified for you to kind of begin what this book is and find Annie?
So this is a really good question, and believe it or not, it was a few weeks before. No, it was a few months. It was several weeks before I actually was speaking with a friend of mine. His name is Ryan Shackleton, and he works for a firm that you probably all know, No History. And he had read All Our Relations and Seven Fallen Feathers, and he approached me, and said, "I'm a big fan of yours. If you ever need my help with anything, let me know." And my mom had been asking me for so long to find her great-grandma, Annie. And my mother is 80 years old. My mom knew she was in Toronto somewhere, but she didn't know where she was buried. And this was something that was just eating at her, she really wanted to know. And she would always ask me, and I felt really bad, I wasn't listening to my mom, what she wanted. And why she wanted this as well, because we had always been looking for her, and her grandson, my mom's Uncle Hank, so my great Uncle Hank, I know there's going to be a test at the end, when he died, he left all of these pieces of paper in a filing folder. It's the brown, it's a Grandin toy folder, and it had all of these letters he had been writing to the province, to the federal government, looking for his grandma, Annie, and looking for any traces of his mom. Why did she never speak of which Indian residential school she went to? Why did she think that she was a quote-unquote dirty Indian, and that everything about her was wrong? She was a very kind of strident Catholic, Roman Catholic as well, and she lived her life by those rules. And she raised my mom. Yeah. But she married an Anishinaabe man, Rusty Bowen, who is from Fort William First Nation, and that's our nation. So, long story. Why is this all important? Why am I blathering on about this? Well, so I had asked Ryan to help me find Annie, and then Lestway, the 215, the community doesn't like to use the term 215. Instead, the missing, Lestway. And so when I got the email from the community saying, will you come and write our story? We've read Seven Fallen Feathers and we've read All Our Relations and we want you to come out here and do this. I got on a plane and I went. And when I got there and I heard everybody talking, well, that's a whole other, I go right into it, but everyone talked about having stories about people that they knew that were gone from the schools, the Indian residential schools, the Indian hospitals, tuberculosis, sanitaria. Everybody knew somebody, had heard a story, and this was always talked about in Kamloops, and they called it the knowing. And so it became totally apparent to me that it was all the same, right? Annie wasn't a little girl. She was 60 when she went missing, but she was emblematic of that search that we are all on. All First Nation, Métis, and Inuit families have someone like this. It's gone.
Yeah.
And so that's why.
Yeah, and when you say the knowing, you write in the book, the knowing provides a different way of thinking. That's how you said it, and I think it's such a perfect way to kind of describe what you're saying. Is it's this understanding that we have of how we see how we see ourselves, how we see our communities, but also how we understand these histories. And I wonder if you can, talk a little bit more about, the knowing and Kamloops.
So, as I said, and I really do believe, like every single one of our families, we have similar stories like this, and we have all been passed down these stories. In our families, we talk about, oh, did you hear there was that great uncle Leo, and what happened to him? He didn't come back, right? Or they knew of someone in our community that, oh, there was someone who just didn't come home, or what happened to that person. They're just not there. I say that in the book too, about that feeling of loss and of just not knowing. It's not knowing people, it's not knowing our family members, and it extends to beyond Indian residential schools. It goes into child welfare and to the 60s scoop and our children like being not there and gone. When I write about that too, I think about my sister. I didn't know her until I was in my 20s, right? But there was something always missing. I could see it in my mom. I could feel it in myself. There was something just unsettled, right? I think that's the knowing.
A really major theme, I think, that kind of goes throughout the book and the documentary as well is the search for records. And you talk about this in just the different ways in which you came into roadblocks with the research you did, and I was wondering if you could maybe talk a little bit about about this this massive search that we have to find our records, and kind of how did you get around some of these roadblocks, and how did you find things, and what really was that process of doing this kind of, which for many people almost seems like an insurmountable task?
Well, the book is imperfect, and because of that, there are records we will never have. There are things I will never know because there just doesn't seem to be any records, right? And when you think about it too, a country that was intent of trying to destroy First Nations people didn't keep accurate records, right? They weren't that careful with writing our names down, safeguarding those records, and keeping them in a special spot. This is why, as Kimberly Murray, the special interlocutor for unmarked graves and missing children, she always says there's records somewhere. Somebody has written something down somewhere. And now it's like looking for a needle in a haystack, trying to find those records. And it's really, I'm glad you asked me that question, especially here too, at the Library Archives Canada. This is a hard place for us. This is not an easy place for us as people to be here, knowing that we have lots of records here. I would love to run upstairs, and so if we take a small break, perhaps I can do that. There are things here, and I want to see them. And I got to know RG10, which is this role in the archives, so incredibly well because it has all of the Treaty 9 information on it, or a lot of the Treaty 9 information, like letters from Indian agents. Because when we talk about records, this is also what we want to see. I had so much of the book and so much help from Indian agents who love to write to each other, and who love to write about Annie, and who love to write about these Treaty 9 Indians that are hanging around in Lac Seul First Nation, and how come they won't disappear, and there are census reports, there are letters, there are notations, and those are the records that are so incredibly important, but they're also so hard to access. And hardly anything is digitized. I think LAC could probably tell you the number that is like the percentage of our records that are digitized. It's woeful. I think it's something, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's around 10%. Yeah, yes, sort of, yeah. I think it's.
We're putting you guys on the spot right now.
And that's not your fault, right? You don't have the staff. You need the staff, you need the resources, and we need to see those records, right? And also too, they need to be digitized. Like one of the things that I've written about in the Globe, and it drives me bananas, is the fact that we don't have an easier way to put put our names in like the U.S. Holocaust database. Put a name in and records come up. Why don't we have something like that for our people? Because it's so hard, and I've had an army of help. You know, from No History to LAC, to Kimberly Murray, to community members. Like, community has been the biggest help, I have to say, with cracking a lot of information and steering the way. But we have to make a better way to serve our people. Like, you know, we're here on the 30th.
Yeah.
Talking about records, yeah.
Yeah, and you know, it's so interesting that you talk about like what LAC, like Library and Archives Canada, and you know, these Indian agent records and the commissioner's records. Like I think like myself, I've read the Numbered Treaties book because like that was written by the commissioner because that's just so widely available. And those records themselves are also so colonial because they were written by people who didn't really care about us.
That's right.
And I was wondering if you can talk to us about Paula and how she helped you and just the amount of knowledge that she had.
Yeah. So Paula Rickard is so amazing. And once we found out that Annie was from Fort Albany, because it was on the census, 1881, it showed that she was 10 years old. And she was from Albany Fort, and that she was a student. Her brother was a student. And where was she a student? There was a school at the Old Post, an older version that became St. Anne's. I don't know, she had to have been there. I believe it was a day school, it wasn't a residential school at that point. And so the records pointed to her being there, and that was a game changer because we found that her last name was Carpenter. Now, as a reporter, I knew a lot of carpenters up and down the James Bay coast. I'd seen the name in Attawapiskat. I knew of carpenters as well in Lac Seul First Nation and Fort Albany. And so so I turned to Facebook, which is true, which is where, everyone turns to, or you should turn to. There is a James Bay Community FYI page. And so I went to that page and I just typed in a message saying, hi, looking for any information that you have on Annie Carpenter or the Carpenter family. I think that's what I said. And then within 45 minutes, Paula Rickard answered, and she was the keeper of the page. And Paula said to me, I know all about the Carpenter family. She said that, I'm from Moose Cree, and I'm a genealogist. And I got to know Paula, and she began to help me. And she was the one that could access the Anglican Diocese archives at St. Thomas Church in Moosonee. She was the one this is what she does. Like it's just her thing. She works for the Cree Health Board, but this is her passion. It's her part-time passion. And so she helped me stitch together the family. And if I didn't have her, and she also has the knowledge, and her family tree has 13,000 names. So she basically has put everybody all together from the coast, and it's amazing because you can see everyone from Moose Factory all the way up the coast, Hudson Bay, over to York Factory, Norway House. Yeah.
Yeah, and this goes back a couple centuries, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We can get back, she'd have to tell you for sure how far she can go back. I think there's a couple people that are like non-Indigenous that you're able to go back a little bit further on that one. But everyone else, like in my case, we can go to 1840. And that's huge if you're a First Nations person because we just don't have the same records that everyone else does.
Yeah. There are a couple instances of the book where you talk about coming across, records accidentally, and learning things accidentally. Yeah. And do you want to share anything on that side?
Yeah, I've been thinking about them today too, especially a lot of accidental records actually, but in particular, I was on my way to, I was deep into researching the book, and I was on my way to Algoma University to give a talk about Seven. And I remember, when you're writing a book, you're in a total fog too, right? You're just like, oh my gosh, don't really talk to people for a long period of time. I kind of disappear. And that was where I was. And I realized, oh my God, I got to be in Algoma tomorrow. I got to give a talk. And so what I decided to do was I'm just like, well, I have to go look on the NCTR, the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation. If you pull up the first page of like Shingwak Indian Residential School, there's always a memorial list. So every school that you search, the first thing you'll see is a memorial list of people, children, I should say, that died at the school. And so I typed in Shingwak, and I went and saw the memorial list, and I saw two names that just jumped right out at me. And I just thought it was going to be sick, because I recognized the last name. The last name is not a name it's not an Indigenous last name. It's Skilleter. It's incredibly uncommon, and there was a Thomas and a Sarah Skilleter. And as soon as I thought that, I thought to myself, that's part of my family. And so I sent a note to Algoma University's digital technician. She's an archivist. She's amazing. Her name is Jenna LeMay. And the work Shingwak has done, just so you know, is unbelievable. And the survivors at Shingwak have been doing that work for decades. And without their work, I wouldn't be able to know about Thomas and Sam, not Sarah. So everything was written down, like even the big red banner that we saw today on Parliament Hill, it had Thomas and Sarah Skilleter on it, because that's what it said on the memorial list. But through our digging, we were able to find out that Sarah was it was misread. It was in cursive, but it was actually Sam. His name was Samuel. And so one of the really special sort of moments of my life was being able to tell the NCTR that that's not a Sarah, that's Sam. Because I felt like, that he knew that I was looking out for him. And Sam died when he was 8 years old at Shingwak. He arrived as a toddler, and Thomas was 18 when he died. He also arrived as a little boy, and they never went home, not once. And they're listed from Fort William. They're listed as Ojibwe. So the records, that opened up, like the search for Annie, opened up Thomas and Sam. So that was something. And another one is Doris Carpenter, who went to Pelican Indian Residential School in Sioux Lookout. And it's all in the book, but it's kind of a long story of going the Albany River, Szechuan. You go from Fort Albany and you go along the water, right? People went along the water. They went to look for work. They were moving, or people move with the water. And Mishkigaugamang is a place where the Carpenters were. Cat Lake as well. And Tommy Carpenter, his daughter was Doris, and she was 4 years old. And she died at Pelican. And so we found those records as well. I found those actually in the LAC records late at night. Spent a lot of time late at night looking through records. Yeah, so, but there were others too. There was Charles Carpenter. I mean, some people and some children, some family members, you can find more than others. And so I let those records tell the story too, and how I wrote the book. I just sort of followed what I was finding.
Yeah, and it's very emotional to speak about. And for me, reading it was incredibly emotional as well, because I just, when I read it, I just knew that if I was to look on the NCTR, that I would probably find the same thing. And I think that's why it's such an emotional chapter to go through.
But it's so important, right? You know, like I really, really think this is how we find our missing relations, is doing that work, is like going back. And I know it's hard and it's painful, but we're doing, GPR, but we need to do this. We need to have genealogy meetings and look at our family trees, and then all of a sudden you'll see things and you'll say, well, who's this? Where's this person? It's important. It's important. Not to be an auntie here, but it's important.
Okay. Well, I have a job to do now. I want to switch focus just a little bit, and this featured I feel like it was a really strong chapter that was in the documentary, and it's in the book as well as a chapter. But for me, when I think about this, I think about it in the documentary form, and it's Saul McAna, and he is a provincial member of Parliament for Ontario, and I would love for you to tell more about being able to help him share his story through your book and through your documentary, because him going to school in the 80s, I think is just something that it just really helps drive home, I think, for a lot of people how late these schools ran.
Yeah. Saul and I are the same age. Okay, I'm a little bit older than him by like 1 year, and he'll always remind me of it. But yeah, and he's been a friend of mine for several years, and one of the things he actually never talked about it. And it wasn't until I was writing All Our Relations and I was talking to Saul, he said to me, he goes, I went to residential school. And I said, what? Because you've never said this before. You're like, I've never heard you say this before. And he's like, yeah. He goes, I went to Stirland. And that was when he had just, I think he became in 2018. So, yep, that's right. Because I was researching about stories, and I said I wanted to also write stories about resistance. And he goes, you have to write about the quiet riot in Stirland. And so I did, and it was about residential school students at a Mennonite-run school standing up. One night they just couldn't take it anymore, and they staged a quiet riot. They had baseball bats, pieces of furniture, and they went after the teachers, because the teachers used to pick on the older boys. They would take one and bring them into the basement and then beat them quite severely. And so he told me about this quiet riot and about everyone standing up, and for one day, they ruled the school. There weren't teachers there, the police weren't there. The police eventually did come in and arrested the boys, right, and charged them, and then that left to a whole other horrible thing, because the people that were perpetrating the violence weren't arrested or charged, which is something that you see all the time in the schools, is those doing the abuse are never charged. There's no investigation or anything. And this was in the 80s, 1986. Yeah, so that's where this is a very long answer. That's where that story came from, and that, he started talking about it, he started talking about being a survivor, and it started percolating more and more with him. He would be the best one to talk about it, for sure, about how he felt, and a lot of his friends just are no longer with us. Yeah. Yeah, and for a lot of reasons, right? You'll see it in the film, and I think I do mention it in the book, about one of the people that used to go to Stirland. It was a pedophile named Ralph Rowe, who's a flying Anglican priest. He used to come in to the school and administer to the students.
And I think that's what's something that's unique about the documentary and the film as well, is because it just tells some of those stories from the book in a different way. Saul's, I thought, was a really, I think because it's him speaking throughout the whole thing about his experiences and looking through yearbooks. And another one I think was, the quest for the papal apology. And what does forgiveness mean? And your book talks a lot about this history of genocide and about this pain, but I think there's also this real question about that is what is forgiveness and how do we heal and what does forgiveness mean? And I think that really came through in that chapter and in the episode. If you're on CBC, it's 4 episodes of the knowing of the apology.
Yeah. Forgiveness is such a personal thing, right? I mean, every person, that's up to them. You have your own barometer on what forgiveness is. And that was something that kept in my head as I went to Rome. It's like, ugh, right? I was carrying people with me, right? People that are no longer here. Everybody that was going over there. But it was up, I was thinking, was the Pope going to apologize? Nobody knows. Is he going to apologize there? Is he going to apologize here? What's going to happen? And then what do we do if it happens? What comes with it? What is forgiveness? What does it look like? I think forgiveness is so personal, and it's every person who is a survivor and an intergenerational survivor, that's up to them on whether or not they forgive. And every person has their own.
Do you want to talk about getting thrown out at Rome?
Oh, right, yeah, then there was that. So, yeah, it was the whole experience I found to be super weird. I mean, I was not an official part of the AFN delegation. I went on my own as a journalist, and so I paid for my way and everything else. But every once in a while, I'd kind of sneak onto the bus so I could get a ride with everybody else. And there was one day where, and that's all super weird too, because you'll read it in the book, but it sort of felt like we were on some kind of vacation. When as soon as we landed, we get onto these giant big white buses, and there was a woman, her name was Helene, at the top of the bus, and she had a microphone, and she was talking to us, telling us all the little facts about Rome. It was like we were on some kind of a strange European vacation. Oh, there's Via Christoph Columbus. I'm like, does she know who's in this bus? And then the hotels, about the sheets and how nice the rooms are, and the food is so good, and I'm like, Indian residential school survivors are in this bus, and you're talking about the food and the sheets, and I'm like, okay, this is kind of tone deaf. And so one day there was a down day, and they said it was organized by the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops, and they organized the AFN, the Métis, and the Inuit to go to Rome to seek the apology. And so we had a down day, and they said, well, we've got a special treat for you. We're going to take everybody by bus, and we're going to go to the Sistine Chapel. We're going to go to the Vatican Museum. And then once we're there, after we see this, we're going to do something else. We have a special treat for you. We are going to the Anima Mundi. And everyone's like, no way. Because the Anima Mundi is where all of the indigenous, they call them quote-unquote artifacts are. So from all of the colonized nations, they have a secret vault called the Anima Mundi, and they keep everything there, and it's not for public viewing. And so they said, you know what, we have some of your things out, and you can come see them. And then there's a lunch. So I just kind of, and I kind of walked in, and I wasn't, Tavia Grant was also with me, who's a Globe and Mail reporter, and weirdly, I've known her since grade 3. This is also really strange. And there was a Radio-Canada reporter. And so the three of us were in there, and you walk in through the iron gates of the Anima Mundi. And as soon as you walk in, you see behind glass cases, there was a headdress on the left. And people, they were working on it. They were, doing something. They had gloves on. And then you keep walking in there, and there were all of these long white tables on the left-hand side. And on these long tables, there were what I call our grandmothers and our grandfathers. There were ceremonial pipes. There was a stovetop pipe. There were moccasins. There were face masks. There were war clubs. There were wampum belts. All of these things. And our entire delegation, we all walked in and just felt silent. Like nobody talked. We couldn't believe it. So what do we do as First Nations people? We whipped our phones out and started taking photos and recording everything we possibly could. And I took pictures of people standing around the tables taking pictures because everybody was doing it. And I actually I talked to your brother and I said, what are we going to do? And he said, make sure someone speaks to them in our language so they know we haven't forgotten them. And then all of a sudden, out of the corner of my eye, I could see this flutter of black robes. And they were coming over towards me, including someone from the CCCB. And he's like, yeah, you have to leave. And I said, what do you mean I have to leave? And he said, this event is for the official delegation members, and you're not an official delegation member, so you have to leave the room. And by this point, Tavia's standing right beside me, and he also said, your colleagues are complaining about you. I'm like, I don't think that's true. But he said, if you don't leave, we're going to frog march you out of here. And it was one of those moments, right? I didn't really want to stay for lunch anyway, because there were these big round tables, and everyone was sitting there to have lunch. And I said to him, his name was Neil, I said, I feel sick to my stomach. I actually don't want to sit here and eat. I'll leave. And also, too, I'm a 50-something mother, right? Getting thrown out of the Vatican, but whatever. But so we left. So that was it. And what did I do as soon as I left? Put it on Twitter or X. I just went, I showed everyone the photos. I said, this is what's there. I had videos. Oh, and I also emailed Claudette Commanda to say there's a wampum belt here that you need to know about because it's really big. And I took a video of it too, and I just let her know that I think this is one of yours. So yeah.
And for those who are not keeping track, there are still calls to get those items back from Rome.
Yes, yeah, they really are, because they belong here, again, that's a whole other conversation about what the Catholic Church has not done. So many things, but you'd think at least one item could come back on the plane with everybody, just one thing. Yeah. But no, nothing. Yeah.
So if we come back to the beginning.
The beginning, yeah.
If we come back to, you said, the end is the beginning. Mm-hmm. And I feel like a lot of how your book ends as well is about you coming home. Mm. And, kind of looking at, now that this book has been written, now that Annie's story has been told, what does this mean to you now to have filled in some of these gaps for your family? Mm. And what does that mean coming home to you, and what does that look like? Mm.
Well, the most important thing for sure was finding Annie, actually finding her. And I don't want to, like, if you haven't really read the book or read anything else about me, I don't know if I should tell them where she is.
It's a secret.
It's
You have to read the book.
Yeah, but, and where she is so, it's like hiding in plain sight. It's remarkable. But finding Annie has led us to find 32 other First Nations people that are buried in the same unmarked graveyard as her. So what we're doing now is trying to find the families of the 32. So that to me has been the most important, for sure, for my mother and for my mom's Aunt Bernice. My Aunt Bernice is 92 years old, and she's Annie's granddaughter. And she's of that generation that's still alive, so she knows where she is. And as my grandmother was dying, Margaret, I was able to tell her that her mom was actually from Fort Albany. You know, that was where her mothers were from, and her family was from, and from Moose Factory. Mm-hmm. That was where her granddad was from. So that was a moment for sure. That's at the end of the book too, and it's pretty wild to be meeting people, you know, and especially in communities that, as a journalist, I have been in for years. I've been writing about this land and about the water. I have been on the Albany Saskatchewan in 2011 with Edmund Minetawabin and his brother Mike with a bunch of youth. You know, I was writing about the Ring of Fire before people were calling it the Ring of Fire. Why was I doing all that? Why did I write the stories? You know, I'm a member of Fort William First Nation, yet all of my stories are Treaty 9 centered. It's you know, and also that cross with Thunder Bay. It's quite interesting. So, yeah, it's been a journey.
Well, I just want to thank you for sharing all these stories, and thank you for being up here with me today. And, you know, it's always lovely to be able to have my auntie in town.
Yeah, so for those of you who don't know, so Joy basically lives in my house, or she used to, every summer.
Yeah, it's
working at the Globe and Mail.
I just, you know, it's a nice place to stay. I bring my cat. So.
And she brings her cat. Yeah.
Yeah, well, lovely that we can have a conversation with everybody as well. And I think everyone will join me in, you know, and thank you for all of the work that you've done for all of our people, and for sharing the stories and encouraging, you know, this next generation to keep looking.
Thank you.
And thank you, Joy, for doing a great job hosting. Thank you all for being here. Jim from Perfect Books is right over there. That's one of 5 independent booksellers in Ottawa. I know you're not going to buy this from Amazon. Do not send the money into space. Shop locally. Tanya will be signing books right here. Thank you for being here. The Writers' Festival is fast approaching, and the great thing about also supporting Perfect Books is every book you buy here will support our children's literacy program, and this year that means busing in high school kids to spend time with Richard Van Camp, which is a great cause and fantastic. We're so grateful for that, and so we're super grateful that you're here, and know that this book is something you're going to want to bring home with you, so pick it up there and get it signed right there, and we will see you very soon. Thanks again for being here.